Hey guys, it's Aurora. Just before we get into the video or the meat and potatoes of the video, just a quick reminder that on Sunday, this Sunday, which is what, the 23rd? Yeah. So this Sunday, the 23rd, Kara from Pagan Crafting and I have put together a public ritual to help shelter animals. We are coming together to be guardians around our animal friends who are in the shelters across the United States, Canada, really the world. And if you'd like to help push energy, we are doing that on Sunday at 12 p.m. Pacific time, 3 p.m. Eastern. I'll put a time converter in the description box below and shoot me an email and I will send you the Zoom link. So feel free to join us. So first, I want to say thank you for coming. But I wanted to introduce everyone on YouTube and Patreon, wherever you're watching this, to Nikki Vasconez. She is an animal communicator. And she actually has a school where she teaches people how to communicate with animals. And I'm very interested in talking to her about what she does, how she got there, and and see if there's anything that we can glean from this conversation that might be useful. And also promote her a little bit because she's super cool. Hi, Nikki.
Hi, Aurora. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on today.
Yeah. So I'm really curious how you sort of found yourself getting into animal communication in the first place. I know that you used to be a lawyer, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I didn't even learn that animal communication was possible until my late 20s. So I was 28 when I found out that it was like a thing. So this wasn't something that I had been doing my whole life or even knew about. So I
Mhm.
was a full-time attorney. I was totally miserable. I had like a 2-hour commute one way. And I knew like something needed to change, but I just didn't know what because student loans and bills, right? And then I just, through a friend of a friend, learned that animal communication was possible. So I just instantly went online and went on Amazon and typed in animal communication books. And that the bottom row of books right behind me are all the books that I purchased and read them all like in a week. And
Oh,
it was like all these, well, not all those books, there was like 10 of them, but all of these books by different animal communicators, they all said the same thing. They all said every single person can learn to do this. And I
mhm.
was like, well, that's fascinating. And most of those authors, they didn't learn about it until they were like in their 50s. And I'm like, all right, well, let's give it a try. So it just started from there, like just learning that this was even a thing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really cool. I remember I think maybe if, because I went down this rabbit hole too. I mean, I didn't take it as far as you, but um, I remember seeing a documentary on YouTube and it's about a woman who intuitively tracks animals. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, oh my God, who is this person? I think she's in Africa or something, or maybe it was Australia. It's been years now, so I can't remember, but um, and she would communicate with like, the wild animals that she
Mm-hmm.
found. And I was like, that's amazing. Like, I
Yeah.
want to be able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, the possibilities are endless. And I'm sure we'll get into a lot of that today, like examples. But I
Mhm.
just encourage everyone who's listening, like right now, just to like, even if you're a little bit skeptical about this, totally cool. Because, in the modern world, we're not raised thinking that this stuff is the norm.
It's
And
true.
we got to kind of like come back to it because our ancestors, the indigenous people, like they were communicating with the wild animals without even trying. And we kind of have lost touch with that in our modern fast paced society. But 100%, this is something that every single person can do.
Yeah, I feel like just being intuitive is part of our DNA and we do it all the
Yeah.
time, but we're not focused on it. So it's kind of like
Right.
reading. If you don't learn how to read, then you're
Mm-hmm.
not going to be able to read.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Like we all get those gut feelings. Every single human being has experienced that where like you walk into a room and you're like, I need to get out of here. Or just like that intuitive feeling, that gut feeling. We've all used that phrase. That's telepathy. That's intuition.
Mhm.
That's exactly what it is. And it's, of course, there's honing in on like the actual animal communication piece, but it really stems just from that innately psychic intuitive part of us that we all have.
Mhm. Yeah. Quick question.
Yeah.
What do you feel like is out of the books that you've read, which ones do you feel like are the best ones?
So I'll answer that in a second, but just so you know, and everyone else, on my website, on the resources tab, scroll
Mm-hmm.
down. I have 8 or 10 of my favorite books, and they're
Oh,
in the
okay.
order that I read them. The first one I started with is called Kinship with All Life. It was like by J. Allen Boone, I think. It was like $11 a couple years ago. And it was fascinating. It was like, people are going to think I'm nuts, but I'm just going to say it. There was more to the book than this story, but one portion of it involved a housefly.
Mm-hmm.
And most people think houseflies are only alive for 24 hours. That's just not true.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, this fly the author named this fly, I think it was Freddie, and he would call him, and every single time this fly would come and land on his finger, no matter what time of day it was. He would have friends over, and he'd be like, watch this. Like, if I call this fly, he comes over every single time. And so it's like, okay, some of us, we hear about animal communication. We're like, yeah, dogs, cats, horses. Okay.
Yeah.
But then you read a story about a fly, and
Mm-hmm.
you're like, okay, what? But in this book, it's a huge portion of it involves this guy's dog, and
Mm-hmm.
how the dog really helped him like realize that this was possible. And then there's a segment about the fly, but Kinship with All Life is amazing. But
Mm-hmm.
to actually learn animal communication, there's a 3-part series, book 1, 2, and 3 by Penelope Smith. They're called When Animals Speak, Animals in Spirit, and then Animals Talk. If you look online, you'll see all 3 of them. And I
Mm-hmm.
read all 3 of those, among others. But those are like the heavy hitters of, okay, this is how it works. These are some stories, maybe some techniques. And Penelope, in a different book, oh no, Anita Curtis is another pioneer animal communicator. And in the back of her books, there's like meditations and different exercises to do to help you connect with the animals, to locate pain or discomfort. The Anita Curtis one is called Animal Wisdom by Anita Curtis.
I think I've seen that one before.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
maroon cover.
Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah. So just out of curiosity, did you ever try speaking to a fly or doing that
It's
exercise?
so not that, but I have a butterfly net in my kitchen. I was just doing it before I logged on, and I catch the flies in the butterfly net when they get stuck inside, and I escort them out, and I'm like, go be free. But not every time, but a lot of the times I can put my hand out and I'm telling the fly, because they're freaking out trying to get out the window, but they keep hitting the window, right? So I
Uh-huh.
say to them, my hand will escort you out to your home. If you go on my finger, I'm going to then walk. You're going to feel me moving, but you're going to end up outside. And I'm not kidding you, Aurora. They will literally walk right onto my finger, and I'll walk across my kitchen, and then I'll put my
Interesting.
hand outside. And my husband's like, the first time I did it, he's like, did you just escort a fly outside? I'm like, I've been doing it forever. He's like, what do you mean? It's so funny. So I have the most success with flies that are not in my kitchen, because the ones in the kitchen are like going nuts because we have a massive window. So if they're like in a frantic state, it's harder for them to be like, oh, Nikki, go on her hand. But any other room of the house, I just put my hand out and they just go right on my finger. It's so cool. So I communicate
Hmm.
with them in that way. Yeah.
Interesting, because I mean, I've never invited like a fly on my hand, but I do take them outside. And
Mm-hmm.
usually when I go up to them, I'm like, "Hey, buddy, I'm not going to hurt you. I'm going to put
Yep.
you where you want to go. I'm going to help
Yes.
you." And oftentimes I can grab them in my hand
Mm-hmm.
and get them
Mm-hmm.
out, but I've never actually invited them onto my hand. I'll have to
Yeah.
try that.
Try it.
That's
And
fun.
you'll be pleasantly surprised at like how much it works, because you and I were talking out loud verbally, right? But communication, telepathy, it's a nonverbal language that's universal among all species. It doesn't matter what language you speak. I mean, just
Mhm.
it's communication, universal communication.
So so when you're speaking, do you get like symbols that you sort of translate? I don't not literally translate, but
Mm-hmm.
is your first are you getting an impression and then letting it kind of come through your mouth? How is your own personal I guess what's the word? Traction. Like how are you getting the communication, and how is it coming through your mouth? I want to know the process or the steps that are going through you.
Sure. So the actual communication,
Yeah.
I don't get messages and symbols. I
Mm-hmm.
will get like, so I always start my session by getting a sense of your animal's personality, because I find that a lot of people are skeptical. They're optimistically skeptical. So I find that if I start the session by describing their animal to a T,
Mm-hmm.
the walls come down and they're like, okay, like how would she have known that? That was pretty cool. So I always start by getting the personality. And the way that I get that message is I'm a very visual person. So I see a lot of things in my mind's eye.
Mm-hmm.
So I see a lot of mental images, but also it's just like a sudden knowing. It's like I know something, I don't know how or why I do, I just do. So
Mm-hmm.
I'll get a sense, like I did a session this morning with a dog, a living dog, and I got a sense that he was I knew he was very old, but very proud and stoic and just likes to watch everything and loves people, but doesn't want to be involved with the people, but loves being around the people. And I just felt this calmness about him. So I'll feel it. I saw him like just perched up like a sphinx, like just observing. So
Mm-hmm.
I'll see images like that. Sometimes I will see them literally running around the house or jumping up all over the place. And I know that they're all jumpy and bouncy. So
Mm-hmm.
that's how the messages come through.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Also, it's like random thoughts in my head, but a lot of my session is me seeing things. But sometimes I don't know what comes first. I don't know if I see the red couch or if an animal says my favorite couch is red and then my mind puts an image to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's sometimes it's hard to tell like what happens first, but a
Mm-hmm.
lot of it is visual and then just a knowing.
Mm-hmm. And do you find that most people who you work with have the same process? Like that's exactly what you're teaching them, or are there other, because with intuition, you can get it through your senses in a myriad
Mm-hmm.
of ways. So um do you find when you're training people that you're training them how you see things and they taking them down that path, or is it more like learn to intuit how you intuit
Mm-hmm.
and figure out how your messages are coming to you,
Yep.
even if it's different from me?
The latter, exactly what you said about it's unique to you. So
Mm-hmm.
I see a lot of images. I get a lot of knowings. One of my students does get a lot of things in like symbolically, and she's working through right now, like figuring out what does that mean.
Mm-hmm.
I always tell people, because I teach workshops every single month. So I always tell people, this is what I do. This is what my style looks like and what works for me. That might not be what works for you. Here are all of the other ways messages might come through. You might get it this way or this way. You might smell something. You might, all of those, the different ways of the psychic senses that we have. So I
Mm-hmm.
always encourage my students. What I find is a lot of my students want to see images and they're like, I want to see a picture. I want to see it. I want to see it. And I'm like, but that might not be your strongest psychic sense. That'll come. But when
Mm-hmm.
you first start, go with what comes naturally to you, because
Yeah.
my students that want to see images are just getting a sudden knowing and they're not trusting the sudden knowing because they're not seeing an image. But then my students that are seeing images, they're not trusting it because they're not getting a feeling. So it's like just like when we're growing up, right? We have straight hair, we want curly hair. We have curly hair, we want straight hair. So I always encourage my students, I'm like, listen, accept what you're getting because we're all different. And the
Mm-hmm.
more that you do this, the more everything's going to strengthen, and then the more the messages are going to come through in all of the ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do you find is like the biggest, is there a common obstacle that you find your students coming up against when trying to learn this?
Fear that they're wrong and
Mm-hmm.
thinking they're just talking to themselves. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like threefold, twofold maybe. It's,
Mm-hmm.
what if I'm wrong?
Right.
What if I'm just making it up and talking to myself? And then like that's two, right? So two and a half, three. The third is like being vulnerable with someone. If I'm doing a session with you live on camera and I say something and you say that doesn't make sense, like as a human being, none of us want to be wrong, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's like you're going in this with your heart in it, you're loving the animals, and then someone says that doesn't make any sense, you're awful.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's going to happen. Not everyone is open to this. So the biggest hurdle for any new animal communicator and anyone really in the psychic intuitive world is the negative feedback,
Mm-hmm.
and just learning to trust yourself and to get confident. Like one day the confidence will come. You just need to keep doing it and keep going. Because with our work, Aurora, it's not like we're transcribing a radio broadcast, right? We're not like looking at a piece of paper and just typing it on a different screen. It's a very much energy, which it's not black or white.
Yeah.
Lack of confidence is the biggie.
Yeah. Especially if you're somebody who gets symbols, because
Yes.
knowing what your symbols mean to you, that's its own process for sure, as you
Right.
mentioned just a minute ago.
Right. And to figure
Mhm.
out what those symbols mean, or really just to excel in any intuitive work, you have to make sure that your physical vessel, you as a human, are well. Because if you're stressed out, if you hate your job, if you're in a toxic relationship, if you're worried about whatever, you're deep in grief, all of that's going to make it harder for
Mhm.
you, your spirit, to like connect in with another. So
Yeah.
it's everything. Like I always tell my students, animal communication is 10% skill, 90% your lifestyle, like
Mhm.
100%. Yeah.
Interesting. That's smart. That makes a lot of sense.
Hmm.
Let me look at my questions really quick.
Yeah, sure.
Um, oh, do you find that people I suppose, is part of your process, um, getting into a certain state of mind? Or like, what's your prep? I mean, you just said like you got to be healthy,
Hmm. Hmm.
but does that extend to, like, do you meditate? Like, what is it that you do in order to prep yourself for coming into your intuitive field or just animal communication in general? Is
Great
that something
question.
you
So,
need to do? Yeah.
yeah, definitely. I think that because any intuitive work, you have to listen within, right? It's not on the outside. So you need to be kind of calm and quiet on the outside. So for me, I do all of my sessions at like 7 a.m. Today I started at 6:45. I'm a very early morning person. So I do my sessions first thing in the morning
Mhm.
before everything. Like I'm not having a conversation with anyone about anything before I do a session, because for me it just takes me out of like where I want to be. I don't do any computer stuff, nothing before my sessions. I
Mhm.
have and I can, but I prefer to do my sessions first thing in the morning before anything happens, before life hits you with whatever it wants to hit you with.
Mhm.
So I'm already pretty calm because I haven't done anything really. But then when I get into my room, it's a room behind me. It's off of our house. It's connected to our house, but it was our garage. It's now we converted it into a room with bathroom. So it's kind of separate, which is cool. But
Mhm.
I'll sit in my chair and I just close my eyes and I just breathe. I don't do, me personally, I
Mhm.
don't do like a specific meditation. I don't do like a 20-minute chant. I don't do a certain thing. I just sit there in silence with my eyes shut and connect into the space that I enter into when I do a session. That might take anywhere from 3 minutes to 10, 15, depending on how I'm feeling and what's going on in my life. Like this morning, it was really fast. And I was like, whoa, like I'm used to having to like in my mind, like picture entering into the space and connecting in with the animal. And I was like doing all of this, but in
Mhm.
my mind, I like saw the animal sitting there, like, okay, I'm waiting. Like, are you ready? So sometimes it's quick, but I
Mhm.
definitely do take time to connect in and to be quiet. Now, that being said, a lot, most of all, well, most of my, all of my client sessions, I do remotely through a picture in
Mhm.
my own quiet room by myself on my own time. I don't, it's not a scheduled call like with you right now. It's not on Zoom. It's not a certain time. It's whenever I do it.
Mhm.
There are times I've done readings on camera, in person, on Zoom. So when that's the case, it's a little bit different because I have, a human being looking at me, or I'm like not in my own quiet room at 7 a.m. So my getting into the zone is going to be a lot faster because I have people looking at me like, are we going to start? So it's possible to do it when you don't have that perfect, quiet, dark room.
Mhm.
But when people are starting out, I find it's best to have that time to really quiet your mind, because the more you can get the chatter out, the easier it's going to be for yourself to believe like, oh, that thought in my head that wasn't there 2 seconds ago, that has to be from the animal.
Mhm. Mhm. And I think you kind of also get a sense of what's yours and what's like what
Yes.
belongs to you and what's
Yeah.
foreign. Like there's
Right.
a sense of like, ah, that's me.
Mhm.
That feels like me. That doesn't feel like me, actually.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Totally.
Um, So when you're going into that process, when you're by yourself, you said something about you go in and connect to the animal. So are you taking yourself through like a guided visualization into the space?
So what I do is I call it the web. And in my mind's eye, I enter into like this realm. I don't know, this like space. There's
Mhm.
not really a floor or a ceiling. It's just this space where all communication is possible.
Mm.
And I ground myself in that space. I make sure the atmosphere is clean. There's nothing clean in the sense of like, is there a nagging thought in my brain? Do I need to do something first? Do I have to pee? Whatever. So I enter into the web.
Mhm.
And when I feel grounded and ready, then I take out my phone and I look at the animal's picture because my clients will submit something online. I'll
Mm.
look at the animal's photo and I will look at their eyes. And then I tap my heart
Mm.
with my right hand. I'm holding the phone with my left hand. I tap my heart and I imagine a beam or a cord of light coming out of my heart, going into their heart center, like through the picture, just connecting us.
Mhm.
And I just look at the photo for a couple seconds and then I take a breath, I close my eyes, and in my mind's eye, I imagine the animal right in front of me in this web, in this space. And when I say web, I'm not talking like a spider's web. It's
Mhm.
just like this realm. Like we're not like sticky or anything. And then I just imagine the animal like right there with me. And then I get a feeling like if they're ready to start. Like if they appear in front of me in my mind's eye, they're ready to go.
Mm.
Sometimes, like this morning, I did a quick check-in. I did a session last week and there was like a follow-up question. And I connected in real quickly this morning. And the dog wanted nothing to do with me. And she was like, I want my food. You're like in the way. And I already answered your question and I'm done. So when I sent the human the recording, I said, hey, just curious, it was 8:15 a.m. my time. I said, is it Taffy's breakfast right now? Because she was hungry and wanted nothing to do with me. And it turns out that her breakfast was a little bit late because it was one of her mom's birthdays and they had like a little celebration and she was hungry. So like I can feel whether they want to start talking and then the
Mm.
session begins. And I don't people always ask me, "Well, are you looking at their picture the whole time?" No, I just look at it in the very beginning to get that like connection with their eyes. But you don't need a picture. I've done it without, but I like it just because I like it. I just do. So
Mhm.
that's what I
Interesting. Okay. And
do.
yes, things to say. Um, so I hold on. I just had the question, then it blew my
Sure.
mind. I mean, it left my mind because Birdie started barking. Let's see. Um, so let's go back to oh no. Here's the question. So I read in a book, and I can't remember which book it was. It was many years ago. And it said that when you communicate with animals, that you need to communicate on their level. And
Mm-hmm.
I guess the way that I interpreted it was like, if you're talking to a 5-year-old, then you need to communicate with a 5-year-old the way that a 5-year-old understands. You can't have a super intellectual conversation. Is that the same? And they said that's the same with animals, is you need to get down to their, not down, I don't mean, you know what I mean? You need
I
to
know what you
like
mean.
communicate with them the way that they would understand. Um,
Mm-hmm.
do you find that's true? Is that something that you believe as well? Because the way
No.
that you speak sounds like it's not. Yeah.
Yeah, 100% not.
Okay.
Now, so I will say, animals, they do learn commands, of course. So
Mhm.
sit, treat, they do learn that stuff. Just like we have words that we say chips or treats, we're like, "Ooh, yeah, I want that." So
Mhm.
if you're trying to say something verbally, like to your animal, let me think of an example. Don't run out into the road. You're going to get hit by a car. You have to stay in the backyard behind the fence. The porch could be safe too. They're going to be like, what? Like, what are
Mhm.
you talking about? So there is something to be said about when you talk to your animals and even with humans, like say what you want them to do. So instead
Mhm.
of don't, even with like kids, don't, if you say don't run into the street or if you say don't put your bicycle on the driveway,
Mhm.
that's what they're going to do. So instead, you want to say, put your bike in the grass or stay on the porch instead of don't run into the road. So
Mhm.
rephrasing the way you say things makes a huge difference.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of like getting down on their level, no, like all over the internet is, you know, dogs, new study reveals dog is just as smart as a 3-year-old. And every time I'm just like, oh my gosh, human beings are so interesting. Because in my sessions, we literally talk about their entire life. Like my sessions are never shorter than an hour, like ever. In the
Mm-hmm.
beginning, when I first started, of course they were, but now it's at least an hour. And we talk about their food, their bedding, their walks, their what they think of their people, every family member, their animal siblings, you know, their house, what they don't like. And it's a very much a back and forth dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
So it's you just communicate with them in the same way that I'm communicating with you right now. And the most common thing that I hear from my clients and my followers on social media is, Nikki, I can't believe how much of a difference it made just simply telling my animals where I'm going, what I'm doing, and when I'm coming back. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, I'm going away for the weekend. I'm going to be visiting Uncle Joe. We're going to be at the lake house. I'm going to be back Sunday at 6 p.m. I hear so often that like 10 minutes before the person's due to arrive home, the animals go to the door because you told them. And it's not like you come home at 6 every day. It could be like no matter what time it is.
Mm-hmm.
They know, they understand what you're saying. So to what you said about getting down on their level, I think that applies more so with like when you're giving them a command or you're saying something like that you want them to respond to instantaneously. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
maybe make it simple. But in
Mm-hmm.
terms of like a soul connection, no, like it's there's no limits, like none, zero.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Interesting. Um, do you find that it's the same with wild animals? I'm assuming you've communicated with wild animals too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So so the wild animals I've communicated with have been just the deer near me. Like if I am driving down the road and I see a deer like right on the road, I'm like, hey, you have to back up. Like this isn't safe for you. Go further away.
Mm-hmm.
Birds I've heard messages from, but I have never at this point I haven't yet communicated with like elephants or anything like in the safari or the jungle. I just haven't been there. But the communication is the same because there's stories online about like whales or an injured animal,
Mm-hmm.
and they understand that you're trying to help them and they let you. Like
Mm-hmm.
they get it, they know. Like, and how if they only had the intellect of like a 2-year-old, how are they going to know, you know? So
Mm-hmm.
there's something to be said about they understand our intentions, what we're doing. And people say, well, they're just reading your body language or your energy. Yeah, well, that too. But
Mm-hmm.
like your body language and your energy is going to mirror what the thoughts are in your head. So, like, if you're approaching a really skittish horse and you're calm and you're moving slowly, while you're doing that, you're probably also saying, I'm safe, I'm your friend, I'm here to help you. And that's all happening within your head. But if you're trying to approach them saying, I'm going to hurt you, I'm going to put you in the stall, you're never going to get out, get in that trailer, even if you're calm, you're not going to have the same reaction from the horse as if you weren't doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to give you a quick example. So before when I was starting Animal Communication, I was also at the same time trying to start an equine massage therapy business. And the equine body work, I stopped that because it was a huge learning curve for me because I knew nothing about horses. I had never been around horses, so I had to learn like everything about horses, which was fine. But when you're trying to start 2 separate businesses, it was just too much. So I was in Sedona for a workshop, and I ended up. This is funny. This is what happens when you force things in life. Life says, okay, you're not getting the message. We're going to make you get the message. So I'm in Sedona and I'm walking to the 3rd day of the workshop and I'm going down the steps. And one of those, I think they're called agave cactuses,
Mm-hmm.
pierced my funny bone. And
Mm-hmm.
it was enough to be the worst pain I've ever felt, literally in my whole life, but not enough to cause any serious damage. And I lost complete function of my whole arm. It hurt so bad. So how are you going to pick up a horse's leg and massage when you have one arm? So I was trying to push through it because the pain was way delayed. It like hurt, but not too bad. So I went to the workshop and I was trying to work with this horse. And before I even realized how much pain I was in, this horse would not let me get near him. He kept walking around me. He kept backing up. He kept rearing up and he like wouldn't give me his leg. And the day before he was fine. I'm like, what is going on? I'm getting frustrated. And the more frustrated I got, the more rambunctious he got.
Yeah.
So it's like they know. And then my arm went from like a 2 in pain to like a 50, and the horse knew it before I even knew it. So they
Mm-hmm.
know.
Yeah, they respond to so many, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
so many aspects of ourselves that we think are not on display.
Right. It's all on display for the animals at
Yeah.
all times.
Yeah. Let's see. Next question. Oh, what's one of the most interesting stories you've encountered in your work?
I knew you were going to ask that because everyone asks that. And I'm like, oh, that's all so interesting. What do I say? So before we met this morning, I was like, all right, I need to have an answer for this question.
Hmm.
And I was thinking, because everything is so fascinating. But what I find to be the most awesome is actually a session I did last week with this dog, Dexter. And what I find to be the most interesting is how instantaneous a session with an animal can I don't want to say fix, can resolve a behavioral issue like instantly. I'm not saying it happens every time. This isn't like a magic pill, but sometimes it's all we need. So this dog Dexter lives in a home with at least two other dogs and cats. And he's fine with every dog and cat except one dog. And they attack each other, like ER visit attack, like really bad. And they're tiny dogs, but they draw blood. It's really bad. So the moms are like, we don't know what to do. So the most of the fights were with the toys. So they got so fed up and they were so sick of their dogs being hurt and them getting hurt, breaking it up. They got rid of all the toys. So there was no toys in the house, and there was never a fight unless there were toys. So I connected in with him last week and I was like, Dex, what's going on? And I forget specifically, like there was things that were driving him a little bit nuts about his brother or the house or whatever. I don't really remember specifics about that because it's hard for me to remember details after the fact. But what I do remember is it turned into like a mini therapy session with this dog where I was saying, because in the session, he was telling me he loves being around people. He loves going to new places. He loves being around dogs. I said, do you like dogs? And he was like, yes, 100%. I'm like, are you okay with other people's dogs? Are you okay with dogs at the park? He said, yes, yes, yes. And turns out he is. I didn't know that at the time, but fine with every animal except his brother, who was actually his son, like his literal puppy son. So I said, okay, listen, Dexter, and I'm talking to him. I'm like, if you love people and you love going places and you love doing all these things, you have to learn to get along with your brother, because you're going to be stuck at home if you are a maniac and you're being a psycho and literally trying to rip your son's head off. Like, if you guys are not getting along, you're never going to do anything ever. And I was being a little bit dramatic there because they're still going to go on walks, right? But I was like, this is real. Like, and if you want your moms to be happy, like, you have to change your act like right now. This is not cool. And he kept saying all throughout the session, I want my toys back. I want my toys back. And I later found out that his moms recently got rid of all of them. And he's like, I just want to play. I just want to play. I want my toys. I'm bored. And I said, well, maybe. I was like, are you fighting over your toys? And he was like, like and I knew, like, it was like a child, right? They don't want to admit when they're wrong. And I just got a feeling like they were fighting over the toys. And I said, well, if you get along and you prove to your moms that you're going to be okay with your brother, I'm sure the toys might slowly start coming out. And I said, do you think that you can try to change your behavior at home with your brother so you can do more things? And he said, I'm really going to try. And I'm thinking, okay, let's see if it works. Because when I was asking him questions like, what's wrong? What can we do with Sheldon? Why do you guys hate each other? I wasn't really getting much other than Dexter was saying he wishes he was an only dog, which is totally accurate. Apparently, the mom said he would love to be an only dog, but sorry, dude, like that's not going to happen. And he just wants all the attention. So he was saying that stuff, but I was like, okay, but like, what else is going on here? So turns out after that session, his mom's had a follow-up call scheduled with me a week later. And they said that instantly, like that day, completely different dog. He was happy. He cuddled with his son, the other dog. They didn't fight over food. The mom, one of the humans, gave the dogs a treat, and usually Dexter like runs over all of them to get it first, and he sat and like so she was like, wow. So they were like, okay, let's try and put a toy out, because in the session, he kept talking about wanting toys, wanting toys, wanting toys. So they put a toy out. The dogs played nice, because before it was, if there was 100 toys, they want the same one.
Mm-hmm.
They shared. And at one point, his mom said that his Sheldon, the son, took the toy out of Dexter's mouth, literally ripped it from his mouth, and Dexter didn't react. And they were like, what just happened? And it was like it was one session. It was that day. So the most fascinating part about animal communication is that this stuff really works. Like, yeah, it's cool to talk to an animal and find out like what's their favorite park to walk to, or what do they love to do, or like, are they happy? Like, that's all of that is great.
Yeah.
But when you have literally a house where it's complete chaos and bloody and like it was a problem, like ER visit after ER visit after ER visit, like, and that stops. And now it's been probably 3 weeks and there hasn't been a single incident like that. That to me is just, it's just, that's the gold. That's just gold right there. Like, I love it.
Yeah. You're actually problem solving.
Yeah.
Helping.
And it was just like a mini coaching session. I was like, hey, if you want to act like this, great. But then this is going to be the consequence. So sometimes I think it's a little bit of like, sometimes they need to hear it from someone other than family. Just like with us, like my husband will say certain things like, oh, you should do this or do that. And I'm like, yeah, okay. And then I like watch a YouTube video. I'm like, hey, babe, look at this. Like, I could do this. And he's like, really? I literally just said that like 10 times for the last like week and a half. And I'm like, oh, you did? Like, so sometimes it's the same thing with animals. It's so funny.
Yeah. Imagine. That's interesting. I can imagine that though. Like I think when you get tied into energetically tied in, it becomes a little,
yes.
Especially if you dismiss yourself in some ways, it's easy to dismiss the person who's tied into you as well, because you're so connected.
Yeah. And also like for the humans in that household, like they love their animals, but they're frustrated. They're angry. They love them, but they're angry because this keeps happening. So it kind of clouds your ability to like push those emotions aside and have the neutral conversation. Because for me, it doesn't affect me, right? I'm not witnessing it. They're not my animals. Doesn't mean I don't care. But sometimes it's easier to have that neutral conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Let's see. So are there any like specific, I suppose, skills that you use to talk to your own animals, especially if like, say you are frustrated with them, and you're like, oh my God, I can't get through to this dude. I'm getting, upset about whatever. Are there any tips or anything that you would have to give somebody when communicating with their own animals?
Yeah. So it's difficult when it's your own animal sometimes, because like you just said, you're emotionally attached. You're so intertwined with them. Like if there's something going on health-wise with mine, I usually cannot connect in because I care too much about the outcome. I assume the worst, right? If they're cold or something like that, like, of course, yeah, like I can get that. But so what you have to do when you're connecting with your own is really just trusting what you're feeling, because sometimes the messages come through so fast that like they're already like down the street and we're like, wait a minute, we're still trying to get the answer, but it already came through. Usually it's that first thought that you have. Like an example, the other night I was putting the dogs to bed and my husband was in bed, and usually we put them to bed together, but he was tired and just didn't get up. I don't remember why. So I put the boys to bed and I heard Merlin say, I want daddy to come in here. Like, where is daddy? Like, why is he not in here? And I was like, did I really just hear that? Or like, am I just assuming that? Because I'm kind of annoyed that my husband didn't come put them to bed, because I know Merlin loves it. And so I just ignored it. And then in their bedroom, there's a bathroom. So I went to go to the bathroom and and Merlin was tucked in. The boys were tucked in under the blankets. The second I walked into the bathroom, Merlin sprinted out of the bedroom, back into our bedroom, and jumped on top of Mike. And I was like, that was from him. Like, why? I'm like, why didn't I realize that was what Merlin wanted? So the messages come through fast. And we often think that we're just thinking about it because we know what they like and what they don't like. So the first tip is just trusting yourself, because majority of the time you're already, well, all of you are already receiving messages from your animals all the time. But like when there's something specific, it's like, what do you feel first? What's that intuitive feeling? Like when you're a kid and you're taking a multiple choice quiz and you circle A and then you erase it and circle D, you end up getting it wrong because the answer was A. So there's nothing different that I do to connect with my own versus other people's animals, other than like paying attention. You really have to be present because the messages are fast. And what's fun is if your animals are driving you mad, like maybe they're not eating and you know they like their food and they're not sick, they're just being like cranky or picky for no reason. No reason. Sometimes you need to flip it around and look at yourself in the mirror. How are you lately with food? Are you a disaster? Are you abusing food? Are you eating, like, what are you doing right now with your food? Because for me, sometimes like food's been like my struggle for a long part of my life. Like I used to have an eating disorder, and we're always working to eat better and whatever. So now I'm pretty good with the food, but there are still times where I know I'm not eating the best that I should, and I would feel better if I ate better. So when my dog starts getting, my one in particular, when he starts getting really finicky with his food, I'm like, what have I been doing lately with my food? And then when I get back on track, he gets back on track. So sometimes they're just mirroring what's happening with us. And it's not really an issue they need to fix. It's, hey, if your dog is a maniac and won't stop barking and is freaking out, are you really stressed out in that moment thinking about something that you shouldn't be thinking about? Sometimes it's that. So it's hard because it's like, you got to kind of always have this dialogue in your head with, is that really them? Are they mirroring me? So really what it boils down to with connecting with your own and also connecting with other people's animals is what I said in the beginning, taking care of you, your physical human being, makes all of this easier because of everything we just talked about.
That makes sense. My dog definitely, that makes, like what you just said makes sense, because I know she mirrors other dogs when she's with them. And I think especially with pack animals, that's the case. Yeah. They're sort of hardwired to be that way. So when you're the pack, then they're going to have that extra, the tentacles in you.
Yep. And like, I see it often with animals who are constantly having accidents in the house. And a lot of times it's the humans that are really nervous and anxious for something coming up, a presentation, a new job or whatever. And once they realize the connection, because I'll connect in and I'll say, hey, why are you having so many accidents in the house? Is your bladder okay? Is something wrong? I'll get the feeling it's mom, it's dad, it's not me. And then I'm like, okay, what's going on with mom or dad? And then, whatever, the conversation ensues. And then the humans are like, oh my gosh, I never would have thought of that. And then once they made that connection and they learn healthier ways to kind of manage their stress and anxiety, they see a direct reflection in their animal's behavior.
That makes sense. Yeah. And it's so hard to see yourself that way too. Like with your own animals, you're like, am I the problem? I'm not the problem.
Right. I know. The problem. I'm not here to say like all of you are the problem for your animal's actions. Like, no, that's not what we're saying. But sometimes like you are the problem. But it's just love. They love us. Like if we're living in a house with someone who's really angry all the time, we are going to be cranky.
Yeah.
That's how it works.
Yeah. The things they put up with, man.
Right.
I know. Let's see. I think I just have one more for this portion.
Sure.
So people who have kids in the house, with animals, are there any specific things that they should be teaching their kids around communicating with animals? I mean, sometimes you hear kids are really open and can pick this kind of stuff up a lot easier than adults. But at the same time, there's lots of animals who are afraid of kids because of their chaotic energy as well. So are there any kinds of like tips in this kind of work, in working with kids and animals?
Yes. So first tip is if your child says, Mommy, Daddy, Samson needs this, listen to your kid. Because like you said, Aurora, children, they are so open to telepathy, and they're just more open. Like we as humans, we as adults, when we get older, we have, jobs and bills and stress and caffeine and, all this stuff. Like it kind of makes our free spirit a little closed off. Not everyone, but just in general, right? We have responsibilities. Children are just so carefree. It's easier for kids to connect with animals. They don't have to learn how to do it because they've never been taught that they can't do it. Adults, we grow up thinking that this is taboo or this is different. Whereas a child, they're just hanging out with their best friend dog on the floor, having a conversation nonstop. And they think it's normal until someone says, oh, honey, that was in your mind. Oh, sweetie, that was so cute. But dogs don't talk. And then when that conversation starts happening, they think, oh, you're right. Dogs can't talk. They just bark or whatever. So it changes the shift in their brain. But now a 2-year-old, they don't understand to not grab and flail because they just want to touch. They're learning how to use their senses. So the best thing to do is to just, first, our kids are going to mirror us, how we are around animals. So if we are loving and compassionate and caring towards animals and gentle, they're going to see that, and it's going to help them learn to do that. But letting kids know in the beginning, like how to be around an animal and say, hey, listen, your fingers flailing all around, like, wouldn't it make you nervous if a random stranger came up to you and was in your face going like this? And just helping them understand. The other week, I guess it was like last year, maybe at this point, the other week, we were at a benefit for this business down the road. And my husband's cousin's child came up to me. I don't know how old she was. I think she was maybe like 7 or 8. And she came up and she goes, hi, Nikki, can I pet your dog? And I was like, thank you for asking, because not every animal loves to be pet. And I was like, wow. I'm like, yes. So I went up to Jessica, her mom, and I was like, she asked if she could pet my dog. And Jesse's like, yeah, we always tell them, you never touch an animal. You always ask permission because maybe they don't like to be touched. And I just thought that was so cool. So just by starting that at an early age, it will help them be a little bit calmer. And just so the animals don't get freaked out by them. Because if a kid is calm, an animal's probably going to be fine unless they assume that all kids are terrors. And then it's going to take a little bit of retraining to be like, okay, not every kid's going to try and jump on you. But children are so open. Like, it's just, they don't have to try at this. So like when we have a kid, I am so excited because like from day one, this child is going to be like, hey, you can talk to animals like I am talking to you right now. And I'm super excited to see like what happens with that.
That'll be fun. Yeah. That'll be really fun. Cool. Well, I want to thank you for answering all my questions and being such a delight to talk to.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so I'm going to close this portion down, and then there's a couple more questions that I want to have for my Patreon. So we're going to just do a couple more questions, but it'll be over there.